On Nationwide this evening, the little-known story of Ireland's links with the Ukraine, the remarkable tale of Countess Markievicz of Lissadell in County Sligo, and of the love story which linked her with the Ukraine. How Irish businessmen are doing the business these days out in that land, and the sailor from Ukraine who got caught up in a famous mutiny and then came to Ireland to set up fish and chip shops. And you're very welcome to another edition of the programme. Today we're coming to you from Lissadell House in the County Sligo, childhood home of one of the most famous women in Irish history, Constance Markievicz. And this evening we're bringing you a special programme on a country in which she spent a good deal of time after her marriage, that is, the Ukraine. Now, at first glance, our two countries might not seem to have much in common, but you'd be quite wrong, because as far back as the 11th century, Irish monks were to be found living and working in Kiev. Some of the best fish and chips to be found in Dublin, arguably, are available from the Bishop family, and they're living in Ireland as a result of a famous mutiny which took place on board a Russian battleship way back when. And these days, Irish businessmen are finding the Ukraine to be a land of opportunity. But first we begin with a love story which spanned Europe.
She was born of a wealthy Anglo-Irish family on the northwest coast of Ireland. He grew up on the other side of Europe. Home for Constance Gore-Booth was Lissadell House in Sligo. For Kazimir Markievicz it was Poland and Ukraine. And what brought them together was their mutual love of art.
They met in Paris when she was studying art. As you know, the whole family was very artistic, and Constance started off by studying art in London, then moved to Paris. So she met this Polish count. He was a widower with a young son, and they fell in love, and she brought him home here to Lissadell and said she was going to marry him. And the family at first were sort of like, well, who is this guy? But they became extremely fond of him, and even though the marriage didn't survive, he always remained a very good friend with the family, and in fact was there at Constance's deathbed and has in fact painted her, both as a bride and on her deathbed. They married in 1900, and then in 1902 and 1903 they spent a long time in the Ukraine travelling, where Casimir returned to his family estates. They had quite large estates there in Zawatka.
But that time in Constance's life has largely been forgotten, overshadowed by her political career in Ireland. A visit by the Ukrainian ambassador to Lissadell, however, reopened that chapter when he said that the people of Zhevotivka were eager to build a new relationship with Sligo. So we decided to travel to Zhevotivka, and we discovered a place not unlike Ireland many years ago. But we were overwhelmed by the warmth of the welcome and the huge interest of people in our visit to their village. School children presented me with a korovi, a special bread reserved for wedding celebrations and the arrival of special guests. We had no idea our visit would be such a big event for the local people. The children had been given the day off school, and the whole community put on a concert for us. For the local people, welcoming someone from the place Constance came from was a chance to rediscover their own history. Before Ukraine became part of the Soviet Union, the Markievicz family were landlords here, but it's Constance who made the greatest impression, and a section of the village museum has been dedicated to her.
When they arrived here, Kazimier's relatives liked her very much, and all peasants were also very glad to see her because she was very kind woman, and she bought a national costume and she wore it all the time, so it was nice for people to see it. She could ride a horse very well, and she was a very kind-hearted woman, and this fact also attracted people to her. Kazimier's mother, Maria, was a landlord. She was countess. She had half of the village and the land, of course.
So they were very rich, were they?
Вони були багаті?
Так.
They were.
Were they good to the people who lived here?
Вони були добрі до людей.
Дуже добрі, тому вони запам'ятались в пам'яті людей. Вони були останні,
People respected them very much. And after when the revolution came and so the estate was destroyed. And you see, people could compare the attitude of Markievicz and the power of that time. It was different. So they loved Markievicz.
And what happened to the estate, to the house and all the land?
The house was destroyed and lands were given to peasants.
A Soviet cooperative was built where the Markievicz house once stood, but now the building is a school where Ukrainian rather than Russian culture is celebrated. The land outside is now a memorial park where those who died in World War II in the area are remembered. And as you walk through it, you come across 2 trees dating from the time of the Markievicz estate, and they're specially marked out with pride in the landscape which inspired Constance to paint.
There she built another building as an art studio, and there they painted their pictures. Most of the pictures, there were landscapes of the village and a real life of peasants. There were roses, bright poppies, and sunflowers 6 feet, 20 feet high, and it reminded Constantia her motherland, Ireland. There was a special wing in this estate for wounded or sick birds, and she very often helped poor birds. She was a very kind woman. Having lived here for 1 year, in 1903 they left Животівка for Paris, and they took Kazimier's son from the first marriage with them, although his mother Maria was was against it, but they assured her that he would be taught Catholic religion and he won't forget his motherland.
Constance never returned to Żywotivka, but locals take pride in her political career and her art. They want to forge new links with her home place, and already the first steps have been taken in building a relationship with the Lisadel estate, and it may soon be selling crafts created in Żywotivka. So, over 100 years after they met, the love story of Constance and Casimir is again transcending time and distance and forging new friendships.
Now, long before Constance and Casimir had met in Paris, Irishmen had in fact been making their way out to the area, which is modern-day Ukraine. In fact, Irish monks certainly made their mark on the wonderful city of Kiev. But these days, it's Irish businessmen who are heading out there, finding it to be a land of opportunity.
They call them singing icons, conjuring up musical images of the splendour of the Eastern Church. The famous Orthodox church bells call the faithful to service at St. Michael's in Kiev. The sound, the style of ringing are unlike anything seen in Ireland. But there is a theory that Irish monks played a part in introducing church bells to the ancient territory of Kiev Rus. It seems a remarkable feat, but over 900 years ago a group of Irish monks travelled first to Germany and then to the farthest reaches of Europe, modern-day Ukraine, where historians say they had an influence way beyond their number.
At that time, some Irish monks arrived in Kiev. They were, it was around 1075, they were accompanied by some German merchants, and they came from Regensburg. One of them, his name was probably Mauritius, had an audience with Gertrude of Kiev and probably with Iziaslav himself. It is known that he received a large sum of money as a present, and shortly after, the large monastery dedicated to St. James and St. Gertrude was founded in Regensburg. Also, it is very likely that during 12th century some Irish monks, skilled book illustrators, worked in Kiev, for we have at least several medieval gospels which contains illustrations of the great Western influence.
Irish monks established a Benedictine monastery in Kiev, but no trace of it remains. It's believed to have been destroyed by Mongols, and today the magnificent cathedral complex of St. Sophia is most likely the only remaining religious site which would have been familiar to the Irish monks.
I think the St. Sophia is the only place which preserved from this time, and the inside part of St. Sophia is the same as Irish monks saw it in the 12th century.
Do you think many Irish monks came here and would they have had much of an influence?
I think that they were not numerous, but they influenced greatly on the Kievan culture.
There may be no sign of the Irish monastery in Kiev today, but there is a well-established Irish pub.
We're constantly busy, football, sports, all kinds, and we get the politicians in. We're a very good location. We've got the Department of Foreign Affairs behind us. Parliament is just 5 minutes drive, and we've had President Yushchenko's birthday party here. We're the only place that he came to for his birthday in the last 3 years. Ukraine is changing, it's developing fast. It's become more West orientated, as the years go by.
Des Reid is one of a small number of Irish people settled in Kiev and enjoying life there. Another is Dick Cray, who arrived in the early 90s and is now Deputy President of Ukrainian International Airlines.
The country was really on its knees in '93 and went backwards. And it was sad in as much as most of the people were less well off through the 90s. But now with economic growth, people are getting a little bit better off, the confidence is building, and hopefully they can see a brighter future. Although there are still many problems around the country, and there are still a lot of people who have very little.
Dick believes the Irish and Ukrainians are very alike, and perhaps that comes from a similar history.
During the 18th and 19th century, the Ukraine and Ireland developed largely in similar ways. For they were under the rule of their more powerful neighbors, and there are a lot of parts of Ukrainian history which are very close to the history of Ireland. For example, there were a large immigration from Ukraine to the North America, Southern America and Australia. There was a great famine of 1932-1933.
Like Ireland, Ukraine has its cultural and political heroes, among them Mikhail Lysenko, a revered composer who wrote for his wife, the prima donna Olga O'Connor. She was the granddaughter of an Irishman called Wild Colonel de Connor, and her sister Valeria, influenced by the 1916 Rising, was an important figure in the Ukrainian independence movement.
He wrote both novels and plays and made the translations from European languages.
Але вона стала помітним діячем політичним в
But she
Україні.
became a notable figure in the political sense.
Ukraine finally gained independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, and the connections now with Ireland are based largely on business. Despite its political difficulties, Ukraine's economy has been growing. It hasn't been immune, however, to the global economic crisis, but different factors have still made it attractive to Irish investors. Big companies like CRH and the Quinn Group have invested here. And a recent Enterprise Ireland delegation saw a number of other business people do a bit of networking in O'Brien's pub, getting the lowdown from those in the know.
The base you're looking at in Ukraine is quite different. There's still an awful lot of growth to come in the Ukrainian economy. Agribusiness is a huge business to grow here. I've always been surprised that Irish companies haven't gotten more involved in agribusiness here. Property is an obvious one, and there are companies who are looking into it. IT is another area that Irish companies haven't, which they could have been, but haven't been so active here, because there's a huge educational base here. Particularly in Kiev and Kharkiv, a lot of students graduate every year with great qualifications.
they need to look at Ukraine as strategic business destination for them to expand their business. Because when you look at the country, anyway, geographical position is fantastic. We are close to Russia, we are close to European Union. We have quite significant market share or market population, 46 million people, with growing prosperity, with growing capacity to buy things. So basically, I think that the opportunities are a lot there.
Over the last few years, there's been a heightened level of interest amongst Irish companies to come to Ukraine, to look at opportunities here, to look at export possibilities in particular. And on a regular basis, we bring groups of Irish companies down to Ukraine to help them get into the market, give them a feel for the market, and in some case, give them a kind of a leg up to actually get customers, get clients, and to get business. It's a growing economy. There's an expanding middle class with higher disposable incomes. And it still lacks many of the things that one would expect in a modern dynamic economy. So Irish companies are there to fill that void.
Well, we came here in 2006, and really it was only in 2006 that Ukraine opened up to foreign investment. Over the past 2 years, we've been involved in 4 office developments here. This one here is the latest one that we're about to undertake, and we're going to build a 14-storey Class A office, about 10,500 square metres. The returns here are better than what you'd get anywhere else in Europe or the US. There's no question about that. On the other hand, I mean, it is essentially a development market. It's not a market where you're going in and getting existing ones. You actually have to develop the product and add the value here. Critically, when you move into it with this kind of market, you have to have a strong local presence, you have to have good local knowledge, and you have to get to establish good connections here. Now, we were very lucky that we ended up with the former business consul from the Ukrainian embassy in Ireland, was coming back to the Ukraine, and he works as our general manager here.
From a business point of view, just working in this environment, some people say there's great opportunities, but there's also difficulties. How do you feel about it?
Yeah, I'd say it's a fair comment. There are huge opportunities here if you're willing to take on the risk. I mean, this pub is 10 years old. You still, I firmly believe, still need a local partner that you can basically trust, and it's still in that situation. It would be very, very difficult doing business on your own.
There's still a lot of bureaucracy, and that's a hangover, a spillover from the days of the Soviet systems. There is some corruption. Hopefully it's reducing. There's only one way to deal with corruption, that is not get involved at all. You cannot be a little bit corrupt. And I think increasingly businesses are succeeding despite the problems. The people are friendly, very warm, and education has a very high value. So there are lots of similarities with Ireland, and we almost bridge Europe in terms of the ability for the people to relate to one another. And I think that helps Irish people doing business here in Ukraine.
So you see in the years ahead maybe more Irish people like yourself ending up out here?
Certainly, I think the number is growing. It's still small, still growing, and hopefully we'll see a lot more in the future. And I would say, please come. Please come, because there's potential here, there's opportunity here, which will actually help Ireland and help Ukraine.
And now to the other side of the coin, a Ukrainian who came here to Ireland and established what is now a thriving business. Because in Dublin, the name Beshoff is absolutely synonymous with great fish and chips. And that enterprise would never have been born had it not been for a mutiny on board a Russian battleship, the Potemkin, back in 1905. Because on board the Potemkin was a young man, a young sailor indeed, called Ivan Beshoff. And this is his story.
The famous Russian film Battleship Potemkin tells the story of mutiny on the Potemkin, which sparked revolution in the Russian Empire in 1905. Dramatic scenes show a massacre on the well-known landmark in the port of Odessa, the city's famous steps. Among the crew of the Potemkin was a young man called Ivan Beshoff, a name which now hangs over some of Dublin's best-known restaurants. So how did he come to be a successful businessman thousands of miles from home? Ivan came from Dashny near Odessa. At the time, it was a poor village with high emigration. The local bishop proudly shows us the ornate church where the Beshoff family would have worshipped. Ivan's father was a magistrate, and the deputy head of the village, who has researched the family, says this is where the Beshoff home once stood, and the children went to school a short distance away.
Мы сейчас будем заниматься просто историей, изучать сами, потому что
The school was rebuilt since the Bishop's time. When we visited it, pupils and staff invited us to join their celebration of National Teachers' Day. There are no Bishops left in Dashney. Ivan's brother emigrated to America. His sisters are believed to have died in Russia. Ivan joined the Russian Imperial Navy at the age of 17 and was on board the Potemkin when the crew revolted and took the battleship to the port of Odessa. Ivan Bishop said that the massacre depicted here on the famous steps of Odessa, known afterwards as the Potemkin steps, never actually happened. It was dramatic license to illustrate the awful times that people were living in. And for the sailors on the Potemkin, it was terrible conditions and circumstances which led them to mutiny.
He described the conditions on the Potemkin as being very difficult. Mainly the problem they had was the poor quality of food, and that they were left starving on a number of occasions, and they mutinied, revolted against the officers. And it's also rumoured that at the time that they attacked one of the port cities in the Black Sea.
A piece of the Potemkin is now on display in the museum in Odessa. The sailors, we're told, took the ship to Romania and later dispersed from there to many corners of the world. Among them was Ivan Bishop.
He was in Italy for a time, and then he went to London, and it's rumoured that he was a friend of Lenin, and Lenin then introduced him to James Larkin, and James Larkin invited him to Dublin. And I think he was more or less just dropping in on his way to the US. But as I said, he never made it to the US. He liked it in Dublin and he stayed, but he never had any desire to go back to the Ukraine.
Ivan worked for a Russian oil company for a time, but then he went into the fish and chip business.
He had a few Italian friends at the time, and they seemed to be going into the fish and chip business, and he decided it was an easy way to do something productive and make money.
Back in Ukraine, a museum dedicated to Ukrainians who became famous abroad has recently been opened in Kiev, and President Yushchenko's brother shows us where Ivan Bishop's portrait hangs.
Ivan Bishop is the classical representative of the Ukrainians who gained the popularity in other countries, especially in Ireland. He was poor, and due to his talent of a manager, he became world famous with his restaurants, and he contributed greatly to the economy of Ireland.
Oh yeah, he was definitely Irish, and he always said that he would never trade Russian vodka for Irish whiskey. He made an awful lot of friends. He was a well-known character, and an awful lot of people could tell you some crazy stories about him. He had a huge tolerance to alcohol. Having said that, it never stopped him from working. He worked every day, and he was always extremely physically active, whether it was chopping his own firewood or gardening or painting the house, which he did at 90 years of age. Even to the day he died, he always spoke English with a broken accent, and you could always detect the foreign accent there. He did make attempts at speaking Oscuelga. A good friend of his was a former Taoiseach, who he frequently referred to as the real Taoiseach at the time. He died a few years ago at the age officially of 104, although we believe he may have been older, because at the time in the Ukraine it wasn't uncommon for births not to be registered for at least 2 or 3 years after the birth. So probably he was between 104 and 107 years of age.
Ivan Bishop was the longest living survivor of the Potemkin, but his legacy now lies in a successful business and a family proud of his achievements in his adopted home of Ireland.
And they came from the Ukraine to show us how to get our fish and chips right. That ends the programme for this evening. Do join us again on Monday next. Until then, from Lissadell and County Sligo, from all of us in the nationwide team, a very good evening to you. And on next Monday's programme, the generations-old story of Irishmen joining the British Army. We know of their sacrifice in World War I, then of their brave service in World War II. But it all goes back much further than that, and indeed continues today. On Monday, we have a special report on the Irishman who joined the most famous Irish regiment of the British Army.